Welcome back to 1830. We're going to be continuing with the 1830 asynchronous email tournament. This is game K of round one, and it's the second game that is finished. So we will jump right in. We have Jazzfish leading this off, followed by David Evans, Dave B, and Bedford. Jazzfish goes for the Camden and Amboy. There's been some conversation in the past about how a first bid on Camden Amboy in asynchronous play, anonymous play, is probably pretty strong because you're never sure if you're just going to be able to walk away with it for face. So no objections there. Evans is going to go for D&H, Dave B, M&H, so no surprises. The three kind of high yield privates have bids. Bedford joining on the Camden and Amboy, so bad luck for Jazzfish. Jazzfish is going to go back for the D&H. David Evans going for the M&H, and Dave B opening up on the Champlain and St. Lawrence. Might see a pull, and we do. So Bedford pulled there and is on the Schuylkill and the CNA. So we'll have a decent chance of being able to afford the CNA with that cheap private. Dave B has a little bit of a more expensive private and the M&H. So it will be a little bit harder for him to fight David Evans potentially for that. However, David Evans is on the D&H, so depending on how that works out, Dave B may actually have the advantage. We'll see how this D&H goes. Looks like it goes for 100, reasonable price, kind of on the cheaper side, I would say. So Jazzfish gets a gift there. David Evans, he is on the M&H and going against Dave B. Dave B goes up to 150, 160 even. Okay, that's a pretty aggressive bid, and David Evans is passing on that. So Evans is out of the auction basically. He's going to have to take the B&O since he has no privates and no bids on the CNA. That means that we should expect Dave to have priority here. So even though he's below 402, we'll probably be getting the PRR. Maybe why he was willing to go for such a high bid on the M&H, knowing that he had a little bit of extra liquidity to play around with there. Jazzfish and Bedford are going to fight it out for the CNA. Goes up to 220, and it looks like Jazzfish takes that. So two players ends up with fairly expensive privates, Dave B and Jazzfish, and two players have very little privates going into the B&O. Looks like David Evans is going to fall on that, and he pars it for 100. Dave B with priority. So I think probably he recognized that he was going to have priority there, which I think is nice, foresight, and he will be taking the PRR. Well played to him. Bedford, he is actually going to contest the B&O. And I'm generally not a fan of this. You're never going to be able to steal the B&O as long as the B&O player only got that private. They're always going to have enough for 5 shares. So you're never going to steal the presidency. And then, what are you really gaining by forcing this float? Yeah, you kill their private, but they're already kind of disadvantaged in the game. You're just kind of leaving yourself potentially open to a dump if you buy too many shares. Just not a high yield play. He's still got enough money because he only has the Schuylkill to go back and float his own company. So we'll see if he does that. But I guess you could just make an argument that you float the B&O, give the B&O player a start to contest the PRR so they don't get out of control. That's fair enough. We'll see if he floats or if he just sits on his cash. Jazzfish, he's passing, doesn't have enough money to float as a result of his expensive privates and the PRR being stolen. David Evans is also passing. So fair enough, doesn't want to rust his private, it looks like. Dave B continuing to float the PRR. Bedford is going to pressure for the presidency here. So now he doesn't have enough money to float, and he is open to a dump. I don't like that. Evans buying the B&O, PRRs continue to float, and Bedford is really pressing for this presidency. David Evans, as noted, has enough cash to get up to 50% if he wants it, but Bedford doesn't even push it. So let's just look at the cash here. Evans has 210, Jazzfish 320, and Bedford just 57. So it looks like he went back and started buying up the PRR. So both of these companies potentially dumpable. With a 2-company float, probably won't see the 3 trains break. So it'd be hard to loot these companies of all the money, especially with the high pars. So even if they're dumped, it's not the end of the game, but still a little bit aggressive. David going for Lancaster, love to see it. I think that's almost always the right move to rush there. And does not buy a train. So I think that his thought here is that you make the B&O unattractive, get your parasite investor to sell out. They'll take a $10 hit for each of these shares. You take a pretty big hit, but then you can buy up those cheap shares, buy the two train, the next OR. You're only going to run for 50 if you bought it here anyways, so your revenue is about the same with your private income. And now you got cheap shares and nobody else leeching off your revenue. So I actually kind of like this play from David Evans. I think this is fine so far. I mean, B&O is kind of rough, but I think if you got to run it, this is reasonable. Dave B, probably predicting he's going to be blocked at Lancaster, so goes for Pittsburgh. But I still think it's wise to move east. You can never really determine when green's going to break. If you have this track laid, you can always snag a green upgrade into Lancaster if you're lucky. Pittsburgh, you can lay that next OR if you find out you're blocked in Lancaster. Really no rush to lay Pittsburgh. So I don't know, small quibble there. Buys a two train, first two trains bought. We're into stock round two. Jazzfish doesn't have enough cash to float, even if he sells a share. So kind of bad news for him. He is going to invest further in the PRR, but there's really not that much left to buy. B&O doesn't have a train. I don't know if you really want to buy those shares. David Evans, he does dump the B&O. So I don't know. If you're going to dump the B&O, I think you got to lay some tragic track and buy 4-2 trains. I don't see much sense in giving them Lancaster and leaving them a very full presidency. This is not, a devastating dump on Bedford by any means. Bedford has, cheap shares that he could sell at a PRR and snag, buy the 2 train, rush to private, and he's in a great position. I don't really get that. I think David Evans tried to split the difference here and protect his privates and then dump anyways. But you got to commit to one or the other. You got to just dump the company with, a less healthy treasury and no access to Lancaster. Okay, so he's going to become the B&O presidency. Floats it very high. Don't really like that either. This is going to mean you're going to operate first. Make it pretty easy for the other players to potentially buy in their privates. You just gave away a huge treasury to a player that actually he doesn't have a private really to buy in, so not the end of the world, but still making it easy for the PRR to buy in. I think you want to float behind these companies, and you probably don't want the C&O either. The B&O is getting into Lancaster, so the odds of the C&O getting into Lancaster is pretty slim because the PRR is probably going to almost always beat you there. What about the NYH? I mean, or even the NYC? We've seen people get burned by the NYC float, so you got to be careful with that. But certainly the NYH, I think that would be a very reasonable option over the C&O. Dave B's passing. Bedford, he is selling out of the PRR, going to snap up these cheap B&O shares. Very reasonable. Jazzfish, he is buying the B&O as well and also selling out of the PRR. So Dave B, he's probably not too upset about that. He's got a full market. He's going to be operating last, most likely to buy in his privates. He's got pretty good ones. Really not the end of the world for him there. And looks like Jazzfish also sells out of the B&O. Don't really know about that. So this player is sold out of all of the companies except for the C&O, has no way to buy paying shares, can't float a company. Yeah, that seems not good. David Evans floating his C&O, we've talked about that. Dave B passing Bedford. He is also passing, okay. Not sure what's going on there. A lot of people sitting on cash. C&O continues to float, and it looks like nobody's really doing anything, just sitting on cash. And we will go into the operating rounds. So pretty passive play there. Some real questionable decisions in stock round two. C&O heading to Chicago, buys a 2 train. B&O gets into Lancaster, buys the 2 trains. So now there's only 3 true trains left, but the PRR already has one, so not going to be able to buy in their 3 or their privates. Bad news for him. PRR does head over to Lancaster, but is going to probably be blocked depending on how the 3 trains come out. So it does get there in the end, but I would have liked to see these track switched in the order that they're laid. I think it's just probably the safer move. Runs for 30, pays it out. Dave B with priority. He is going to buy a C&O. Okay, you can expect them to be running for 70, reasonable. Bedford going to buy the yellow B&O shares. Jazzfish selling the PRR, and finally we'll be able to float a company. He takes the MINH. Okay. And David Evans, he is buying the cheap B&O as well. Dave B out of cash, not much to do. Bedford, he is going to snag his 6 share in the B&O. And this is why the dump of the B&O is kind of silly, right? This player's got a great treasury. He's got great map position. He's in yellow. He's got 6 shares in yellow from stock round 3. That's a pretty good position. I don't think that's a good dump at all. Jazzfish going to continue to float. Looks like everybody else is just watching him do that. And we are into OR3. CNO gets into Chicago, runs for 70, pays it. NYNH lays towards the B and M. And this is the first player really with the opportunity to buy into the threes. He's got the CNO, but if he buys into the threes, he's not really going to have the cash to be able to afford it. He could buy in the D&H at least. So, probably motivated to make that happen. I would be tempted, but he's going to sit on that, and this just makes it quite easy for the other players to buy in their privates, specifically Dave B, I would say. I think Bedford doesn't have very good privates. Yeah, just the Scoogle. So Dave B now just has to buy 2 2s and a 3. Maybe motivated to do that. Is going to head west still. Can't get into Lancaster yet, obviously. Pays out for 30, doesn't buy in his privates. So pretty slow start. B&O has a ton of cash, decides, well, I'm going to head down south because I got nothing else to do. I don't love that. I'd rather just sit on the cash. It's going to token Lancaster, okay. And then he buys a 2. And yeah, okay. Better early game revenue, I guess. Going to make it easier for the other players to buy in their privates, just move things along. David Evans, not really enough cash. Doesn't look like anybody really has enough cash. And we just have a quick stock round. Operating round 4. CNO lays the number 2 track, runs a 2 train, and is not buying in privates. It's starting to get a little bit harder to explain why people are not going for their privates here. Well, I guess fair enough. He doesn't have privates because he's the B&O player. PRR, he is going to buy into his privates. Okay, finally we're seeing some action here. Buys the M&H in the Champlain St. Lawrence. And the NYNH now has a very easy time getting his privates if he wants them. Runs for 70. Did have to pay the $80 for the New York upgrade. Don't know if you want to do that when you have expensive privates to buy in. The privates you're going to get 100% of the value of the privates by buying them in. With a higher run, you only get 60% of that. So you'd much rather have the $80 in your treasury than the negligible increase in your revenue by upgrading that track. So buys the D&H, and as noted, is going to be very short of the 320 CNA buy-in. With another $80, he's at 270. Maybe you just, say forget about the $50 and buy it in anyways. So you have a lot of liquidity into the next stock round. I don't know, just a different style, I guess. B&O runs 2 trains, upgrades Baltimore. Very surprised we don't see the Lancaster upgrade here. Get you into running in Allentown, blocks the PRR. I think this is kind of short-sighted. Yeah, it's a little extra money, but is that going to be long-term that big of a deal? Probably not. 140, pays it out, buys the 3. Buys 2 3s even, so has a ton of trains. Going to be running for a lot. And you know what? I don't hate that either. Nobody's going to want to buy these IPO shares and take a $33 hit early in the game. So you're probably going to be pretty secure in running for 60% of whatever you run for with very few parasites. Does leave him train tight when the 5s break and pretty low treasury, but with a high revenue, 1 withhold, get you back in there. All right, so reasonable. But I do disagree with this Baltimore instead of Lancaster upgrade. Buying in his private, and we are into the next stock round. Should be seeing at least one other company float, but probably 2. Evans buying the NYNH. Dave B selling out for a higher float. He takes the Erie. Okay. If we look at the map here, Erie, yeah, I don't know. He is the PRR player, so potentially hoping to get some help in Pittsburgh for the Erie. But you have the NYC potential here. You have the B&M, pretty much guaranteed access into New York. I don't know that the Erie is the first choice of companies here. Regardless, that's what we see. Bedford buying the CNO, Jazzfish buying Payne shares. So it looks like maybe one company floating. Dave B, maybe he just wants to reserve that presidency. He's going back for Payne shares too, it looks like. Bedford, CNO, and Jazzfish, also CNO. Okay. Dave B, yeah, it looks like he's not really motivated to float. He's just going to lock up $200 in that presidency for later. I think this is situational, reserving a presidency. Sometimes it's worth doing. I don't know if this is the situation. Jazzfish still buying paying shares. These B&O shares are very expensive, but this revenue is going to be pretty sky high with 4 trades. Dave B also going for the B&O, and looks like everybody passes. Stock around, or sorry, operating around 5. So this has been a very slow game. We have not seen 4s break, and we are already in operating room 5. I think we still have privates that haven't been bought in too. CNA, yeah. So very conservative, slow play. CNO laying kind of random track. Very surprised we don't see this track upgraded here. I don't want to spoil my game. I am also in the tournament, but I'm faced with a similar dilemma in my game, and I think I make the wrong decision. But this is definitely the wrong decision. He can't even run this track. So surprised we see that. CNO runs 2 for 70. He buys the 3, so doesn't have to worry about falling back, and does not buy the 4. The 4 is exposed. You got a player with 2 trains tracked to run it, another 2 trains to run it. You have 1 share in those companies. These players have 6 shares each. Yeah, definitely want to rest those 2s here. You still would have $300 in your treasury. And yeah, really no reason to sit on the 4 here. This is why the game has been going so slow. Nobody's buying trains. PRR gets into Lancaster. This is what you don't want as the B&O player. Now you have competition for the Philadelphia track. Yeah, just unforced error there on the B&O, I'd say. Tokens in Lancaster does have a much better run for himself. He's able to run all 3 of his trains and even get into Baltimore with that. So yeah, that's why you don't give away Lancaster. Runs for 150, pays it. NYNH actually laying pretty odd track, I would say, is going to be able to double tap New York, but is not heading down towards Reading and Allentown. Sure, the number 2 track has been denied, but you could potentially get into Philadelphia here. You control the CNA. So surprised that we don't see him laying that. Does allow him to run 2 trains, so better revenue, of course. Does he withhold here for the CNA buy-in? I think that's the move. Again, you get 100% of the revenue if you buy in your private versus 60 if you pay it. So he pays it. We do have 1 more opportunity for him to do that. Would like to see that. B&O going to be running like a monster here. Upgrades Pittsburgh and snags the token. So this is real bad news for the CNO. Cut out from the east. Needs to upgrade this with a sharp turn here, which is what I should have done in my game to get access into the east before Brown. Runs all 4 trains for 260. That is kind of inexcusable. Someone needs to shut that down. Pays it out, living large. CNO going to continue laying weird track. I mean, I guess he's trying to run both trains into Columbus, but not a fan. Runs for 110, pays it out, and still doesn't buy the 4. NYNH living with 2 trains still, runs for 140, and does withhold, great. Buys the CNA for max, so the NYNH is happy as a clam, has bought in all of his expensive privates, has decent map position, and his choice of the B&M or the NYC. Columbus, sorry, not Columbus, the B&O has got access into Philadelphia, has no tokens, so will not be able to secure a run through there. And as a result of not upgrading Lancaster, doesn't have Reading and Allentown even to run into New York. So I'm going to keep harping on this Lancaster mistake. Runs for 300, very nice, pays it out. PRR gets a better run into Baltimore for himself and is also going to have a very high revenue. Immediately tokens Philadelphia. Really no reason to do this here. B&O has no tokens to contest you. Nobody else can get there. And there's no guarantee that Philadelphia upgrades into New York here. So this is a potentially wasted token. Just hold on to the cash. You do not need to token that at this stage in the game. Runs for 240, pays it out. And we're into stock round 6. Bedford with a ton of cash because of those absurdly high B&O runs. Again, you got to rust these 2s. Jazzfish also with a ton of cash because he bought in the CNA. David Evans falling behind with a pretty poorly positioned CNO. And then Dave B also with a ton of cash because the PRR is not far behind the B&O in terms of runs. So everyone but David Evans starting to get some real nice revenue in this game. Bedford with priority has his choice of companies, and he's going to buy CNO. Okay. Jazzfish, he's going to snag the NYC. Okay. He's the NYNH, so he can guarantee it has good runs. Fair enough. Selling out of the PRR. I suppose that's just to get a cash for the float. David Evans. Buying the B&M. No way he's going to be able to float that without selling out very heavily. And if Bedford trashes the CNO first, he may be totally unable to float this company and get it stolen. So questionable. Dave B, he's going to go back for his Erie now. Okay. So might see 3 companies float here. That could be a pretty explosive acceleration in the train roster, which is going to be much appreciated because this game has been very slow. Bedford, buying the NYNH, just buying Payne shares. Jazzfish, buying his NYC. David Evans out of cash, so selling the NYNH and buying PRR. Okay. Dave B is going back for his float still. Bedford, buying NYNH. Jazzfish, dumping the NYNH. Okay, don't hate it. You've looted that for everything. Well, I take it back. I'm not a huge fan of that. And I say that mostly because you have the NYC. So now that you've given away your friend the NYNH, no guarantees that this NYC gets any worthwhile track. Otherwise, I don't hate the dump. Does give people brown shares, has a 3 train and good runs. So not the devastating dump, has good private income to, supplement its treasury over the next operating round or two. I think this is probably an unnecessary dump and ill-advised because of this NYC float he's working on. He is going to pressure for the B and M. Okay, so maybe he's hoping to get the NYC and the B and M. It's feasible. David Evans is going to have a hard time defending here. We'll see. Erie almost floated. Bedford passing. Jazzfish continuing to pressure here. We'll see David Evans sell out of the CNO. Doesn't want to risk losing that presidency. We'll buy actually selling out of the B&O too. So he's going to sell it heavily and we'll get just south of $300. So it doesn't have enough for 500 or 50% of this company. We'll see if he risks losing the CNO to secure the B&M. For now, he will buy the B&M. Dave B sells the PRR. Filling up his market here, making it less likely he needs to withhold. And he is going to actually buy CNO instead of the Erie. So I expect this CNO is going to be sold here. He does to trash it, and he's going to go back and float his Erie, just a little friendly stock trashing. Bedford, he's also buying the CNO and going to hold it for now. Jazzfish pressuring the B&M still, reasonable. David Evans has to defend. Dave B passing. So interesting. I'm not entirely sure. I guess he wants to hold on to his liquidity to trash other people's companies. Or he's worried that they're going to trash his company if he invests fully here. Does run the risk of losing out on priority if he waits too long, but I think he's safe here. He's not going to end up with priority since Jazzfish has so much cash and he's trashing companies. So Dave B knows he's gone second and can just wait to see how other people invest their cash before he locks up his liquidity here. Fair enough. Bedford's selling the CNO. Everybody's kind of trashing this company. Buying the NYNH. Fair enough. Cheap shares. Jazzfish. He is still pressuring the B&M. David Evans does have to sell the CNO. And Bedford sold just a little bit too soon. He could potentially have stolen that company if he hadn't done that. David Evans does get the B&M. We'll see Jazzfish sell out there now. And Dave B, after I just said he was going to sit on cash, goes back and floats the Erie. Okay. Bedford going back for these cheap NYNH shares, just buying them one at a time since they're still orange. Jazzfish goes up to max investment in the B&M and trashes it. Okay. That's always hard to see. Surprising that he doesn't sell all 5 shares. So he takes a little bit of a hit there too. Not entirely sure why he wants one B&M share. Yeah, I don't know. Evans passing. Could afford to beat NYNH, but sold it, so it has to just sit on $49. Dave B doesn't want an NYNH, it looks like. Maybe worried about a counter dump. Bedford buying the NYNH still. Jazzfish passing. Hasn't floated his NYC. Really has a ton of cash sitting on 7 shares. Why is he passing? I'm not sure. It looks like everybody's passing except for Bedford, who is still buying NYNH. Jazzfish now going back for the Dave B shares. maybe seeing some trashing of the Erie as well. Dave B sells in advance to limit his bleeding and is going to buy the NYC to trash it in return, I guess. Jazzfish continuing to buy shares, does trash the Erie, but is really kind of not accomplishing a whole lot here. And surprisingly, actually passes into the OR, sitting on almost $600 cash, an unfloated NYC, no presidencies. This is odd. I mean, this has to be an error, right? Did he just misclick? Maybe click to auto pass? I don't know. Um, that's not the move. All right. CNO lays Columbus and is going to run his 2 trains. Tokens Columbus of all places. I understand that he's going to be a long time before he heads east, but what is the point of this? Just throwing away cash. B&O has nowhere to. B&O has no tokens. Why would the PRR waste a token out here just to block the B&O? No, not the move. Runs for 130, pays it, buys the 4 finally. Should have done that 2 operating rounds ago. And actually, why do it now? There's 2 companies that have floated. One of them is going to buy it before any of these 2 trains run. Yeah, I don't know. B&M, Land Providence, and buys a train out of the CNO. So I guess that's why you do it, right? That way you can buy a train out of the CNO, shuffle some cash, and then the CNO still has a train to run with. Okay, all right. Makes sense. Should have done it earlier. Erie, he is setting his self up for a run into Rochester. Buys a 4. We're sitting on 2 4s still. PRR, regretting that he doesn't get to run those 2s again, but that should never have happened to begin with. Upgrades Columbus away from Chicago, so not going to let the CNO run into Chicago there. And PRR is also out of tokens. So really, what is this token about? Neither of these companies is going to co-token there with you. So this is just a total waste. All right. Running into Philadelphia with the 3 train for 120, pays it out. B&O, 2 3 trains, so still pretty good revenue, but has depleted his treasury. He's going to need permanent trains here, so needs to figure out some withholds to not fall back. He's going to pay for 230, needs to withhold at least once here, I think. Bedford, oh yeah, especially because he's got the NYNH too. So he's got 3 3 trains across 2 companies. Neither one of them has a healthy treasury. He really needs to find a way to get some cash. Going to block the NYC. Yep, that was predictable, right? So the NYNH was dumped on you. You screw over the guy that's floating the NYC. Not that the NYC actually floated, but geez, what a train wreck that situation is. Running his 3 train for 90, pays it out. CNO, not laying any track really. Running for 110, pays it out. PRR, laying for eventual run into Chicago. Could have had a run into Chicago if he just upgraded Columbus the other way around. So confused by that. Runs for 120. I guess just didn't want the CNO to be able to run it. Maybe. I'm not sure. B&O running 2 3 trains still, heading up to the Erie home. Fair enough. Runs for 230. B&M upgrades Providence. Probably should upgrade your home here. I guess with just a 3 train, got to decide if you want to run into New York or your home. So that makes sense. Okay, I get it. Sitting on 730, Erie gets into Rochester, immediately drops the token. Runs for 60, pays it. NYNH, sitting on track and running for 100, withholding. So Bedford is acutely aware that he's going to be in a lot of train trouble shortly here. Probably needed to withhold on the B&O too. It's kind of unfortunate to do that, of course, because you're so heavily invested here. Although, really, if you're going to withhold, maybe you withhold on the company that you have 60% of instead of the 70%. I don't know. Regardless, not in a great situation when these trains rust. David Evans buying a CNO. Dave B going for the NYC. Kind of strange that this company hasn't floated already, so he's going to, I guess, help out. Bedford buying the NYNH. He's up to 80% of that company. I think that if you're Bedford, you need to look towards other players' shares. You deplete their markets, and you're going to have to withhold on some of your companies. At least I'm expecting you to. So I don't know how high yield paying a $27 premium for this orange share is, especially when you're floating yourself up. You're already at the end of the orange, so you're probably going to have to sell this share in the next stock round. Yeah, I think you got to look towards other companies. Jazzfish, still not interested in the NYC. He's going to buy a CNO. David Evans, last share for him, buying the B&O. Dave B, pressuring for the NYC presidency. Okay. Bedford buying the Erie. Jazzfish has to defend his presidency, although really, do you have to? Because the NYC is looking like a dead letter here. Dave B, he's trashing the NYC. No surprises there. Goes back for paying shares in the B and M. Bedford, Erie, Jazzfish also going for the Erie, so it's going to be just sitting on 40% of the NYC. David Evans still passing. Dave B, PRR. Bedford, B and M. Looks like everybody's just buying paying shares. We'll zip through this a little bit. Doesn't look like a whole lot of going on here. Bedford doing a little bit of rearranging of his portfolio. Actually, a pretty big arrangement. Getting a lot of cash here. And Jazzfish also doing some trashing. We're going to keep moving. And the NYC is actually max invested at the end of the day. Looks like Bedford made a play there for that. And is going to sit on 40% of this company with really no track. Could get into Providence here, but also could see it blocked by the NYNH token. Does have cash for that. So really, is this an attractive company? I don't think so. Even with the expensive $120 lay, has pretty bad potential. He does have priority on Jazzfish, so he's not worried about a dump. But really, why are you putting all your cash in this company? I don't know. He's got a huge share lead. I will give him that. But that share lead may be illusory because he's got to buy 2 permanent trains with very little cash, so could be selling those shortly. C&O, not laying any track, runs for 110, pays it out. NYC is setting up for the Providence run. We'll see if he's able to make that happen. Buys the train before the permanent Poison 4, and PRR is up, still sitting pretty with the 3 train, withholding. Okay. And buys a train out of the Erie. So going to lose the run on that. Leaves it trainless. I think this is a little bit of a risky play. You're making a gambit here that the B and M is going to buy the 4 and the 5, then you snag 2 5s. If that happens, it's great, but I don't know. Can you guarantee that happens? If the B and M buys the 4 and the 5, Erie buys both 5s, does the C&O get a 6? Yes. Okay. And that puts Bedford in train trouble. So if Bedford bankrupts, who wins? Could be any of these 3 players, realistically. So I don't know that you should really be pushing trains here for the 6. You can't guarantee you win. All right, well, we'll see. B&O heading over to the Erie. Runs for 230, pays it out. Not afraid of the impending train rush, it sounds like. B&M upgrading his home, runs for 100, pays it, and does push into the 5s, has to discard the 3, of course. This works out great for Erie. 2 5 trains for Dave B, usually a pretty winning combo. The NYC is upgraded by the NYNH, runs for 120, and does withhold. Okay, so staying orange. Next operating round, C&O does upgrade Columbus, gets his Chicago run, and withholds for the 6. So these players did coordinate this train rush pretty well here. Bedford, trainless, is going to snag the last 6, but this leaves him in quite a world of hurt on the NYNH because it's going to have to buy D out of pocket unless he shuffles the 6. But that's just entering the death spiral. And really, we could see the D train come out, even before the NYNH runs. I mean, he still has to buy D either way, but it's kind of a pretty fast D train potentially. B&M sitting on 2 trains, has a pretty good revenue, pays that out. NYC, does he withhold here for the D train? Looks like he had to lay a lot of expensive track, so even with a withhold, is not going to have it. And NYNH gets tokened out of Providence. That's kind of bad news. That's not a really good run for the NYNH anymore. And that happens, unclear why that happens. Has exactly enough money for the token, but just didn't lay it. Okay. A little bit of an oversight there, potentially. NYC withholding. So even though he doesn't get the upgrade, still withholding. not far off the upgrade. Could be looking at the next OR. This is his only company, so yeah, I don't know. I wasn't a fan of the way that NYC developed. Lancaster running a 4, also in a little bit of train trouble here. He does have 2 5 trains in the Erie, so expect to see one of those shuffled out. Looks like this PRR token is going to be kind of low yield here. The Philadelphia track didn't upgrade into New York as he was hoping, so this is why you don't lay that token. Erie, just 1 5 train is going to run that for 120, pays it out. NYNH, $40 for the token, but too little too late, and is going to shuffle the train. So he does have a big share lead, like we mentioned, but he owes the bank $1,100. So he's going to have to sell a ton of these shares unless he keeps shuffling, but he's just in a death spiral. There's no way to change the operating order so the B&O operates behind the NYNH, so he's never going to be able to run a train as things stand. None of his companies are dumpable. He's not high in priority. This is pretty much game over for Bedford, I'd say. Stock round 8. We have $9,000 left in the pool still, in a company that still needs a permanent train. Also, a company that is not floated, so this game could go pretty late. We could see this go to OR 11 potentially. David Evans buying a PRR, 2 trains, high in priority, so possible that it will be able to run that train before the D train comes out, especially if it floats up. Then he's pretty much guaranteed to be running before the D in the B&O. So reasonable investment there. Dave B, he is going to buy the C&O, also a company very likely to be running before the D train upgrade, and 2 trains, decent revenue. Bedford buying C&O. I think in this position, you do have to buy companies that are operating high in priority to get as much cash as you can and minimize the number of shares you have to sell. In fact, you probably want to sell out of the B&O at least once, trying to get it operate late in priority before you have to buy your D train. Yeah, sell out of the B&O. Probably sell out of the NYC too, since they're going to be withholding. And that's just going to be less cash that you have to fund your purchase. I don't know, just a rough spot for him, but I do like the C&O purchase. B&M running, or sorry, B&M being purchased, now floating up. And David Evans, Erie, Dave B, Erie, Bedford, PRR. Okay, if this floats up, it will also operate ahead of him. Jazzfish, Erie. Looks like everybody's just buying paying shares. 2 players sitting on cash here, I guess hoping to maintain priority so that they don't have to worry about dumps. Okay, and we are into operating around 8. C&O gets into Columbus, or sorry, not Columbus, the Gulf, and runs both trains. Pretty pathetic run, honestly, even with 2 trains. You're only able to single tap Chicago. So really just the way this track is developed is not amazing. Last time this 4 train will run. PRR gets into the New York track and has much better run, 420, pays that out. But again, 4 trains are going to be going away. B&M, pretty good run for itself. 370. B&O here. I don't know what this is. Why not give yourself a big loop into New York here? Is this track unavailable? I guess maybe it's been consumed. So really needs to hope for the Brown upgrade to make that happen. Okay. Could have just upgraded here and then tried to get that track over here. I don't know. He is going to sell quite heavily and gets the D train. That does mean that nobody else is going to be running those 4s, of course, but just look here. His net worth is, half of the leaders, and his share lead has evaporated. Does have decent runs on the B&O. This token in Columbus is not going to stop anything, and if he's able to get this upgrade here, we'll be able to run through New York, potentially into Baltimore, and then into Chicago. So nice D run, and that is pretty secure. No one's going to be able to cut that. But I think that he's too far behind. When your net worth is half the other players and you don't have a share lead, I think you're probably toast. Erie, upgrading the double O's. Going to run for 160, pays it out. NYC, also trainless, but pretty close to D-Train money. Has to sell out of the B&M. That's painful. And that is because he tokened in New York. I don't know about that. The way this track is upgraded, it doesn't cut the B&M's runs. and you got a out-of-pocket D train. So why are you putting $100 into a useless token? I don't know. Buys it for 480 out of his presidency. Now everybody has their trains. NYNH is going to run for 210, decent 6 train revenue. Is withholding, and I think this is just to stay brown. Doesn't really need the cash. Does need to token Albany if the Erie starts heading over here. PRR blocks the run for New York. No surprises there. Runs for 230, pays it. CNO, just laying kind of random track. 210, pays it. B&M. Upgrading Albany has a little bit more revenue as a result. 220, pays it. B&O, big D run here for him. And despite this upgrade, is still able to hit most of the revenue centers. Probably wouldn't have been any better otherwise. Maybe he could have hit Philadelphia. Probably not if he had been able to upgrade here friendly. Unclear. So at most lost $50 as a result of this track, but probably no change. Runs for 390, decent revenue, going to be the highest in the game, I'm sure. Erie continuing to work on those double O's, but going to be another 2 track lays before he's able to hit another one. 170 pays out. NYC, first D run for him, and it is only 240. Pretty poor. Doesn't really have much potential since he's token out of Rochester too. NYNH, heading over to Rochester. If you're going to lay that track, I think you got to drop the token in Albany. Does the Erie have money for a token? He does. So yeah, I think you got a token there. You have the cash. You're withholding to stay brown anyways. Pays it out. OR3. PRR running the same route. CNO getting into Toledo. Not too consequential. B&M. Not a whole lot to say. B&O. Probably interested in helping this Toledo development. Will be extra cash potentially if he's able to get some runs into these double O's, but it's going to be a long time coming. Erie, he heads over to Albany, tokens immediately. That was pretty predictable. So now has a run into New York without having to hit any dits. 240, good news for Dave B. NYC, same run, nothing special. NYNH, tokened out of Albany kind of inexcusably and takes a $30 hit in revenue, pays it out and moves into yellow. Also a strange decision. You're relying on your share density to come back into this game and you got to sell 2 shares now, or at least 1 share. Yeah, he's going to drop into orange with 1 share. And we are into the stock round. So let's just take stock of the game state here. Dave B is our leader by $500. He is 3 shares ahead of his closest competitor and has actually a pretty decent track for both of his companies. Decent runs, 250, 240 compared to like 210, 220. Yeah, so very decent runs. The only one outrunning him is B&O. Nothing he can really do about that. And this player is out of the game functionally, so not overly concerned for Dave B, I'm sure, about that. So definitely leader in the clubhouse, Dave B. David Evans, his runs are a little less exciting. The CNO we've been criticizing for the start of the game. B&M, similarly kind of unexciting runs and really no potential for better runs. Trailing in shares, but does have his pick of the litter in terms of shares right now. Bedford, dead in the water. Jazzfish, NYC, pretty poor run and going to fall behind in shares. So it's going to come down to David Evans and Dave B. And Dave B probably is going to take this just based on shares and the fact that his runs are just marginally better. Let's just skip this stock round unless the CPR floats or there's a dump. Nothing really to see. So look at this here. Dave B still in the lead with shares. And this is a consequence of Pedverd having to sell a share by leaving brown. Isn't actually at his cert limit, but there's not really any shares worth buying. Nobody's going to float the CPR, it looks like. If we look at the spreadsheet, he was slightly out-earned by David Evans in the stock round. And Dave B has second in priority, is capable of dumping on Jazzfish, but really no reason to. And I don't think he's open for any dumps He is not. So it doesn't look like we'll see any shakeup in position here. Let's skip the OR and just look at the spreadsheet to look at revenues. Looks like David Evans and everybody's just neck and neck, but Dave B has a $500 share lead, so or net worth lead, so he's going to just win this if the status quo is maintained. Could potentially see the B and O get a little bit of a higher run out here. That'll probably be offset by Dave B potentially getting a slightly better run into more of the double O's. In terms of investment in the B&O, Jazzfish is the only one with a or Jazzfish has two shares. David Evans and Dave B are co-invested, so the revenue of this company is irrelevant for the outcome of the game since they are both equally invested and they're the two players contesting the lead. So really, I think that this is Dave's game. Nothing that can be done to shake up the game state. Let's just go into the stock round, look at the spreadsheet. Yeah, revenue slightly favoring David Evans, but with a $500 deficit, a $30 net worth change is not going to be cutting it. I will note that Dave B is going to have to sell a share potentially, and I guess David Evans could, in theory, buy a share, but the share that Dave B sells is going to be bought by one of these other players, so it's going to be a net change of one share for Dave B, which is not going to be enough to switch anything up. So I think we just skip to the end here. Dave B, he wins by a lead of about $500, like we said, or $600. Doesn't look like any of this track came to anything. Nobody dumped anything, and we didn't see anybody withholding for a D train. CPR never floated. So a lot of mistakes in the early game from several players, and then Bedford just kind of got stuck having to blow his lead by buying a D train that he wasn't prepared for. Yeah, I don't know. Dave B played well enough to win and will be advancing in the tournament. So well played to him. And we will continue to follow this tournament and bring you the games as they finish. Thanks for watching.